A mountain man found a pregnant woman frozen to his door, and when he touched her belly and said, "My son," he spoke a truth he didn't yet understand. In the dead of winter, miles from anywhere, a grizzled trapper who'd sworn off the world pulled a dying stranger from death's grip. She carried secrets that could shake the territory, and the child in her womb held a destiny no one could foresee. The man who saved them both thought he was just offering shelter from the storm. But when the cavalry came riding with lies on their lips and chains in their hands, they found something they never expected. A family forged in desperation, bound by something stronger than blood. When the government itself becomes your enemy, how far would you go to protect the family you never knew you needed? Your comments remind me that we're not alone in feeling deeply. If loyalty, second chances, and human dignity mean something to you, then you're right where you belong. Jonathan's hands trembled as he tucked Sarah's patchwork quilt around Elena's still form. The woman's dark hair spread across his wife's pillow like spilled ink, her face ashen beneath copper skin. Only the shallow rise and fall of her chest proved she still lived. He pressed weathered fingers to her throat, counting the weak pulse there. Too slow. The bitter cold had nearly claimed her. Moving swiftly, Jonathan added another log to the hungry flames. Sparks scattered upward as he jabbed the fire poker between the burning pieces, urging more heat from them. The familiar scent of pine smoke filled his nose as he worked. "Hold on," he muttered, though Elena couldn't hear him. The words felt strange in his throat after so many months of silence. Wind howled outside, rattling the cabin's sturdy walls. Snow whispered against the window panes like ghost fingers. Jonathan had weathered plenty of mountain storms alone, but tonight the isolation pressed heavy on his shoulders. He gathered his medical kit from the shelf, remnants of his cavalry days when he'd served as field medic. The leather bag was worn smooth from years of use. Inside, precious bottles clinked together as his fingers sought the whiskey he kept for emergencies. Kneeling beside the bed, Jonathan lifted Elena's head gently. "This'll warm you from the inside," he said softly, tipping a few drops between her blue-tinged lips. She didn't stir, but he felt her swallow reflexively. The child moved again, a visible ripple across Elena's swollen belly. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't touched a pregnant woman since Sarah. The memory of his wife's rounded form beneath his palms, their unborn babe kicking against his hand, struck him like a physical blow. He stumbled back from the bed, chest tight. The medical kit slipped from nerveless fingers, spilling bandages across the plank floor. Jonathan braced himself against the rough wall, struggling to draw air into lungs that seemed to have forgotten how to work. "Lord help me," he whispered hoarsely. The words emerged as vapor in the still chilly room, but he couldn't afford to fall apart. Not with 2 lives depending on him now. Jonathan forced himself to straighten, gathering the scattered supplies with shaking hands. Sarah would never forgive him if he let this woman and her child die. He set water to heat on the pot-bellied stove, then began methodically checking Elena for frostbite. Her fingers and toes were ice cold, but hadn't yet blackened. There was still hope if he could warm her gradually. Jonathan wrapped heated stones in cloth and tucked them carefully around her body, avoiding her belly. The baby's movements had grown stronger, a good sign, but it also meant the child could come anytime. He wasn't prepared for that. Wasn't prepared for any of this. "What were you running from?" he murmured, noting the tears in Elena's dress, the raw scrapes on her palms. No one traveled these heights in winter without desperate cause. The wind's mournful keening offered no answers. Snow continued falling beyond the windows, erasing any tracks that might have told her story. By morning, the storm would bury all evidence of her passage. Jonathan settled into the chair beside the bed, determined to keep watch through the night. Elena's breathing had steadied somewhat, though her skin remained cool to the touch. From time to time, her brow furrowed as if in troubled dreams. He found himself studying her face, the proud line of her nose, the curve of her cheekbones. Even in unconsciousness, dignity marked her features. This was no ordinary woman who had stumbled to his door. The silver bracelet on her wrist caught the firelight. Its intricate designs spoke of skilled craftsmanship and deep meaning. Jonathan recognized Ute patterns worked into the metal, similar to those he'd seen during his cavalry years patrolling the territory. His gut tightened. Relations between settlers and the Ute people grew more strained with each passing season. If Elena fled her own people, she must have faced grave danger. If she fled from whites. His jaw clenched at the implications. Either way, she'd chosen his remote cabin as sanctuary. The responsibility settled over his shoulders like a heavy cloak. After 3 years of shutting out the world, God had sent someone who needed him. Thunder cracked overhead, making the cabin's timbers shudder. The storm showed no signs of weakening. Jonathan added another log to the fire, watching shadows dance across Elena's face. "You're safe now," he told her quietly. "Both of you." The promise surprised him even as he spoke it, but he knew in his bones it was true. Whatever brought this woman to his door, he would protect her and her child with everything he had. Elena stirred slightly, turning her face toward the fire's warmth. Some color had returned to her cheeks. Her hand drifted unconsciously to rest on her belly, where the baby continued its restless movement. Jonathan touched the silver cross he wore beneath his shirt, Sarah's last gift to him. "Watch over them," he whispered. Then he settled deeper into his chair, prepared to guard his unexpected guests through the long night ahead. Jonathan worked through the midnight hours with grim determination. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, though his heart raced with worry. Elena's moccasins had frozen nearly solid, and he carefully cut them away to reveal feet mottled purple and white with frostbite. The sight made his throat tighten. He'd seen men lose toes to such cold during the war. "Easy now," he murmured, wrapping her feet in cloths warmed by the fire. His fingers remembered the motions from treating cavalry horses with winter colic. Animals and humans weren't so different when it came to surviving bitter cold. The kettle bubbled on his pot-bellied stove, filling the cabin with the rich scent of beef broth. Jonathan had been saving the precious dried meat for harder times, but he reckoned this qualified. He dipped a spoon into the steaming liquid, testing its temperature against his wrist like he once did for Sarah's morning tea. Cradling Elena's head, he pressed the spoon to her lips. "Come on now," he coaxed, letting drops of broth fall onto her tongue. Her throat worked reflexively, swallowing the liquid. Hope flickered in his chest. He continued the slow process, one careful spoonful at a time, watching for any sign of choking. The wind's fury gradually lessened outside, but the night's deep cold remained. Jonathan kept the fire blazing, feeding it precious logs from his dwindling winter store. Every hour, he changed the warming stones tucked around Elena's body, replacing cool ones with heated replacements. Near 3 o'clock, her breathing grew shallow and thready. Alarm shot through him as he pressed fingers to her neck, counting the weak pulse there. The baby hadn't moved in some time. Without conscious thought, Jonathan laid his weathered hand on her swollen belly, seeking any sign of life. For several heartbeats, nothing. Then, there. A flutter against his palm, followed by a stronger kick. Relief washed through him so powerfully his knees nearly buckled. "Hold on, little one," he whispered, surprising himself with the thickness of emotion in his voice. "Hold on, my son." The words hung in the quiet cabin. Jonathan drew back, startled by the surge of protective feeling that accompanied them. He hadn't allowed himself to think of fatherhood since losing Sarah and their unborn child. The pain had been too raw, too deep. But something shifted in his heart as he watched Elena's belly move beneath the quilts. This child, this mother, They needed him. The realization filled an emptiness he'd carried for 3 long years. He spoke softly through the remaining dark hours, telling them both about the cabin, the mountain, the changing seasons. His voice grew hoarse, unused to so much talking after years of solitude. But he couldn't stop. Each word felt like a thread binding him to these unexpected guests. "Spring comes late up here," he told them, tucking fresh warm cloths around Elena's feet. "But the wildflowers make it worth the wait. Purple columbine and yellow buttercups thick as carpet on the meadow." The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Jonathan smiled, despite his exhaustion. "Reckon you'll be running through those flowers yourself come summer." He described the elk that grazed nearby, the hawks that soared overhead, the sweet berries that grew along the stream. Tales of the mountain's gentle bounty flowed naturally into memories of Sarah. Her laugh when he brought home fresh trout, her joy at spotting the first crocus pushing through snow. To his surprise, sharing these memories brought comfort rather than pain. Perhaps Sarah had guided Elena to his door, knowing they all needed saving in different ways. Gray dawn light eventually crept through the frost-rimed windows. Jonathan blinked tired eyes, realizing he'd been speaking for hours. His throat felt raw, his back ached from sitting vigil. But Elena's breathing had steadied into a natural rhythm. Pink tinged her copper cheeks, replacing the deadly pallor of the night before. He checked her feet again, relieved to find warmth returning to her toes. The frostbite hadn't progressed past the early stages. With proper care, she would heal. Exhaustion pulled at him like lead weights, but joy bubbled beneath it. They had survived the night, all 3 of them. Whatever came next, he would face it with renewed purpose. Elena stirred slightly, turning her face toward the strengthening light. Her hand drifted to rest protectively over her belly, where the child continued its lively movement. Jonathan watched them both, feeling the first warmth of dawn seep into his weary bones. The winter sun had climbed high in the pale sky when Elena finally stirred. Her dark eyes fluttered open, darting around the unfamiliar cabin in confusion. Fear crossed her face as she tried to push herself up from the bed. "Easy there," Jonathan said softly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten her further. "You're safe here." Elena's hand flew protectively to her swollen belly. "Where?" She started in halting English. "Where am I?" "My cabin. Found you frozen at my door last night." Jonathan kept his voice gentle, the way he'd speak to a spooked horse. "Name's Jonathan McCready." She watched him warily, clutching Sarah's patchwork quilt closer. "New to you," she said, then switched to English. "I am Ute." "I figured as much," Jonathan nodded. "You were mighty near frozen. Lucky you found my place when you did." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "Nigh Av, my husband," she whispered. "Soldiers come, many guns. Standing wolf, he—" Her voice broke. Jonathan's heart clenched, recognizing the raw grief in her expression. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She drew a shuddering breath. "They force us. March to reservation." Her face twisted around the foreign word. "I run. Try reach grandfather's camp in high mountains." She gestured toward her belly. "Baby coming soon. Storm catch me." Jonathan nodded, remembering how the child had kicked against his chest as he'd carried her inside. "You're both safe now. Storm's past." Elena studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "My father," she hesitated. "Chief Running Bear of Ute Nation. My husband, Standing Wolf, son of War Chief Blackhawk." Pride mingled with sorrow in her voice. "Baby carry blood of 2 great leaders." Jonathan's eyes widened slightly at this revelation. He'd heard of Running Bear, a respected leader known for trying to maintain peace with white settlers. Now his pregnant daughter lay in Jonathan's bed, having fled a forced relocation. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on his shoulders. "Kacharu," Elena said suddenly, touching the warm quilt. She pointed to the crackling fire. "Kacharu." "Warm," Jonathan repeated carefully. She nodded, then touched her chest. "Pani." She mimed, rocking a baby. "Panichi." "Safe," Jonathan translated. "Baby." A small smile touched Elena's lips as she taught him the words of her people. When the child kicked strongly, she reached for Jonathan's weathered hand. He hesitated only a moment before letting her place it on her belly. The baby's movements were much stronger now, good, solid kicks that spoke of renewed vigor. Elena's smile widened. "Little fighter," she said softly. "Like father." Jonathan felt a pang at her words, knowing she meant her fallen warrior husband. He didn't correct her assumption about why he'd called the child "my son" in the night. Some truths were better left unspoken. As evening approached, Elena managed to sit up against the headboard, though the effort left her pale and shaking. Jonathan heated some thin broth, adding extra water to make it easier to swallow. While she sipped carefully from a tin cup, Jonathan settled into his chair by the fire. His hands moved automatically, knife blade scraping steadily against a piece of pine as he carved a wooden spoon. The familiar motions soothed him. "You lose someone too," Elena said quietly. It wasn't a question. Jonathan's knife stilled. "My wife Sarah," he answered after a moment. 3 winters passed, fever took her and our unborn child. Elena touched her grandmother's silver bracelet, a gesture Jonathan would come to recognize as one of deep emotion. "Naiav," she said again, but this time the Ute word for spouse carried a different weight, shared understanding rather than fresh pain. They sat in companionable silence as darkness gathered outside. The fire popped and crackled, casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Jonathan's knife resumed its steady rhythm, shaping the spoon's bowl with practiced strokes. Elena hummed softly, a melody strange to his ears but somehow comforting. 2 grieving souls, brought together by chance and desperate circumstance, finding unexpected solace in each other's presence. Jonathan glanced at Elena's peaceful face and felt something shift in his heart. Perhaps Sarah had guided this young mother to his door for a reason. Perhaps they could help heal each other's wounds. The wooden spoon took shape beneath his hands as night settled over the mountain cabin. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now they had warmth, safety, and the quiet comfort of shared understanding. Over the next 3 days, fierce winds howled outside the cabin walls as another blizzard descended upon the mountains. Inside, warmth and healing flourished. Elena grew stronger with each passing hour, her color returning as she rested in Jonathan's bed while he slept on a bedroll near the fire. On the second morning, Jonathan winced while stoking the flames, his old cavalry wound flaring in the cold. Elena noticed his discomfort immediately. "You hurt," she said, pushing herself up from the pillows. "Show me." Jonathan hesitated, then pulled down his shirt collar to reveal the twisted scar on his shoulder. Elena's eyes narrowed with recognition. Reaching for her deerskin medicine bundle that had survived the storm, she extracted dried leaves and roots. "Mountain medicine," she explained, crushing the herbs between her palms. "From sacred peaks." She mixed them with warm water, creating a pungent paste. Her gentle fingers worked the mixture into his scarred flesh with practiced ease. The relief was immediate. Jonathan rolled his shoulder in amazement as the familiar ache subsided. "That's remarkable," he said. Elena smiled, pleased. "Mother teach me, her mother teach her." She pointed to different herbs in her bundle. "Pine needle tea gives strength. This root?" She held up a twisted brown root. "Help when baby come." They fell into comfortable routines as the storm raged outside. During the days, Elena taught Jonathan the healing properties of every plant in her medicine bundle. Her eyes lit up when speaking of traditional remedies, hands moving expressively as she explained each one's purpose. In return, Jonathan helped Elena build her English vocabulary. She proved a quick study, eager to learn. During one lesson, she spoke of her late husband. "Standing wolf," she said softly, touching her wedding bracelet. "Great warrior, kind heart. Like you, protect others." Jonathan felt humbled by the comparison. "He sounds like an honorable man." Evenings brought peaceful companionship. Elena insisted on making herself useful, carefully mending Jonathan's worn shirts with neat, even stitches. The familiar work seemed to comfort her. Meanwhile, Jonathan's knife-shaped pine scraps into small treasures: a rattle, a teething ring, a tiny horse. Each completed piece brought a wider smile to Elena's face. On the third night, she removed her silver bracelet, holding it in the firelight. Intricate patterns danced across the metal surface. "5 mothers wear this," she explained, tracing the designs. "My grandmother's grandmother first. Each add mark for daughter born." She pointed to different symbols. "Tell story of our family. Remind us we never alone." Jonathan leaned closer, seeing the bracelet with new eyes. "It's beautiful," he said softly. "A living history." Elena nodded. "Mountain spirits watch over mothers, protect babies." She gestured to the peaks hidden behind the storm. "They guide me here, to your door." Something in her words touched Jonathan deeply. He found himself sharing things he'd never spoken of before. "After Sarah died," he said slowly, "I was angry at God. Couldn't understand why he'd take them both, my wife, my child." He stared into the flames. "Came to these mountains to hide from that anger. But the land, it has its own medicine. Started healing me before I knew it was happening." Elena listened intently, her dark eyes full of understanding. "Mountain spirits work through many hands," she said. "Your God, my spirits, maybe same medicine, different names." Jonathan considered this. "Maybe you're right." As the fourth evening settled around them, they sat in comfortable silence. Elena sewed by the fire while Jonathan shaped a small wooden bowl. Outside, the storm was finally weakening, but neither spoke of what that might mean. They had found something precious in these days together. 2 wounded souls recognizing their shared pain, their shared healing. Words weren't needed to express the deep understanding that had grown between them. Elena hummed softly as she worked, an ancient melody that seemed to belong to the mountains themselves. Jonathan's knife moved in rhythm with her song, shaping beauty from raw wood, just as time and trust were reshaping their broken hearts. The fire crackled warmly, casting its gentle light over them both. The native healer and the mountain hermit, brought together by fate and fierce weather. In this moment, they were simply 2 people who had lost much, but were discovering that grief shared becomes grief transformed, and that hope can take root in the most unexpected places. The 5th morning dawned clear and cold. Sunlight sparkled across fresh snow as the storm's fury finally released its grip on the mountains. Jonathan and Elena shared a quiet breakfast of cornmeal mush, both secretly dreading the end of their peaceful isolation. Around noon, Elena paused in her mending by the window. Her body tensed like a deer catching a predator's scent. "Horses," she whispered, her face draining of color. "Many horses." Jonathan rushed to the window. Through the crystal-clear mountain air, dust clouds rose from the valley trail. The unmistakable glint of military brass caught the sunlight. "Quick," Jonathan urged, leading Elena to the root cellar beneath the cabin's plank floor. "Stay quiet, no matter what happens." He helped her down the ladder, his heart aching at the fear in her eyes. As he closed the heavy trap door, he caught one last glimpse of her clutching her swollen belly protectively. Boots crunched in the snow outside just as Jonathan straightened up. A sharp knock rattled the cabin door. "United States Cavalry, open up!" Jonathan took a deep breath and opened the door to find 6 mounted soldiers, their blue uniforms stark against the white landscape. Their leader, a weathered captain with steel-gray eyes, studied Jonathan carefully. "Captain John Morrison, 7th Cavalry," the officer announced, dismounting. "We're tracking escaped hostiles from the reservation roundup." His gaze swept past Jonathan into the cabin. "Seen any Indians in these parts, mister?" "McCready, Jonathan McCready." Jonathan kept his voice steady. "Can't say I have, Captain. Been trapped inside by the storm these past 5 days." Morrison nodded slowly, but his sharp eyes had already spotted something. He stepped closer to the doorframe, examining the snow. "Interesting tracks here, McCready. 2 sets of prints. One looks like moccasins." He traced the air above the impressions. "Leading right to your door." Jonathan's mind raced. "I trade with friendly tribes sometimes, before the storm hit." 5 days ago, you said?" Morrison's tone remained professional, but carried an edge of skepticism. He walked the cabin's perimeter, his men spreading out to search the surrounding area. Near the well, the captain crouched to study more tracks in the snow. "These are fresh, McCready. Woman's size, by the look of them." Jonathan's pulse quickened, but he maintained his calm exterior. "I live alone, Captain." Morrison returned to the doorway, his keen gaze catching something that made him pause. With deliberate slowness, he reached out and plucked a long strand of black hair from a rough spot on the wooden frame. He held it up, letting sunlight catch its distinctive sheen. "That's quite a head of hair you've got there, McCready," Morrison said dryly. "For a man living alone." Tension crackled between them. Jonathan could see the internal struggle in Morrison's eyes, a career soldier wrestling with conscience. The captain's next words confirmed it. "Look here, McCready, I've got my orders, but I'm not blind to—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. Certain complexities in this situation. He glanced at his men, then lowered his voice. "I've seen enough of these roundups to know they're not always—" He left the thought unfinished. Jonathan remained silent, watching the captain wage his private battle between duty and humanity. Finally, Morrison straightened his shoulders. "Here's what's going to happen. You have exactly 24 hours to surrender any hostiles you might be sheltering." His emphasis on might was subtle, but clear. "After that, I'll have no choice but to return with a proper search party and federal charges for harboring fugitives." He mounted his horse, gathering his reins. "We'll make camp just down the valley, quarter mile or so." His steel-gray eyes met Jonathan's one last time. 24 hours, McCready. Make them count." The patrol rode out, hooves crunching through fresh snow. Jonathan watched until they disappeared around the valley bend, then hurried back inside. He lifted the trap door to find Elena trembling in the dim cellar, her arms wrapped protectively around her unborn child. "They know," she whispered, her dark eyes wide with fear. Jonathan helped her climb out, supporting her weight as she sank into a chair by the fire. Through the cabin's window, they could see dust rising from the cavalry camp, Morrison's men settling in to watch the cabin. Their peaceful mountain refuge had become a trap, with time running out like sand through an hourglass. 24 hours to find a way out, or face the consequences of their desperate choices. Elena's hand found Jonathan's, squeezing it tightly. In that grip was everything they couldn't say, their fear, their determination, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them during these storm-bound days. Now that bond would be tested against the full weight of military law and frontier justice. The night wrapped the cabin in darkness, broken only by the faint glow of banked coals in the hearth. Elena paced quietly near the window, one hand pressed against her lower back. Jonathan watched her with growing concern, noting how she paused every few minutes, her breath catching. "The baby," she whispered finally, gripping the back of a chair. "He comes too soon." Jonathan's heart jumped. He'd seen that same tension in Sarah's face the night they lost her and their unborn child. But this time would be different. It had to be. "How long between pains?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The cavalry camp flickered with distant firelight through the trees. Elena closed her eyes, counting silently. Maybe 7 minutes. Her fingers twisted around her grandmother's silver bracelet. Too early. Should be weeks more. Jonathan's cavalry medical training kicked in. He'd helped deliver foals and calves during his ranching days. Human birth couldn't be so different. He gathered clean linens from Sarah's old chest, trying not to think about how he'd packed away her maternity things 3 years ago. "We'll manage," he assured Elena, though his hands shook slightly as he tore Sarah's faded dresses into strips. "Just like you showed me with your herbs, one step at a time." Through the night, Elena labored in near silence. She gripped Jonathan's hands during contractions, her knuckles white but no sound escaping her lips. The soldiers mustn't hear. Between pains, she taught Jonathan sacred Ute prayers, her whispered words mixing with the wind's howl. "Great Spirit," she murmured, "protect this child. Guide him to light." Jonathan repeated the words carefully, adding his own silent prayers as he kept the fire low and boiled water in his smallest pot to minimize noise. Around midnight, a fresh blizzard swept in, its fierce gusts masking Elena's increasingly labored breathing. "A blessing!" Elena gasped between contractions. "Storm spirits hide us." The hours crept by. Elena's pain intensified, but she remained focused, directing Jonathan with remarkable clarity. "Clean cloths ready. Water warm, not hot. Support baby's head." Near dawn, Elena's body tensed with a different kind of force. "Now," she breathed. "Baby comes now." Jonathan positioned himself as she'd instructed, his heart pounding but hands steady. Elena bore down with incredible strength, still maintaining near-perfect silence. Within minutes, a tiny head emerged. "One more," Jonathan encouraged softly. "You're almost there." With a final tremendous effort, Elena delivered her son into Jonathan's waiting hands. The baby was small but perfect, his skin a beautiful blend of his parents' colors. Jonathan quickly cleared the child's airways just as he'd done for countless foals. A thin, healthy cry pierced the air. "Quickly," Elena whispered urgently, "to my chest." Jonathan laid the squalling infant against Elena's skin, covering them both with warm blankets. The baby's cries softened to whimpers as he found his mother's warmth. Elena's eyes filled with tears of joy and exhaustion as she gazed at her son. "You saved us both," she said, looking up at Jonathan with deep gratitude. "You are father now." Her fingers traced the baby's delicate features. "He will be Thomas, like your middle name. Thomas Standing Wolf McCready." Jonathan's throat tightened as he watched them together. He'd never expected to hear a child called by his name again. Elena's simple declaration, "You are father now," filled an aching void he'd carried since Sarah's death. Later, as the storm continued its protective roar, Elena drifted into exhausted sleep. Jonathan cradled baby Thomas, marveling at his tiny fingers and the dark sweep of his eyelashes. The infant's grip was surprisingly strong around Jonathan's weathered finger. "Welcome to the world, little Thomas," he whispered. "Your mama's the bravest woman I've ever known." He rocked gently, remembering Elena's prayers. "We'll keep you safe, son. Both of us together." Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the cabin, a new family had been born. Neither Jonathan nor Elena knew that through the storm's fury, Captain Morrison had caught the faint sound of a baby's first cry. The truth they'd tried so hard to hide was now carried on the wind, reaching the ears of the one man who could destroy their fragile happiness. The mountain winter wrapped Jonathan's cabin in endless white, but inside, warmth bloomed like spring. Each morning he woke to Thomas's soft coos and Elena's gentle Ute lullabies. The sound filled spaces in his heart he thought had frozen solid 3 winters ago. Jonathan's hands, once used only for trapping and survival, now crafted gifts of love. He spent hours at his workbench, carefully shaping a pine cradle. The wood shavings curled around his boots as he smoothed each edge until it was perfectly safe for the baby. Elena watched from her bed, Thomas at her breast, offering quiet approval as the cradle took shape. "Like bird nest," she said, running her fingers along the rounded edges. "Safe place for little one?" Jonathan added small decorative carvings of pine trees and mountains around the sides, remembering how Sarah had always loved his woodwork. He fashioned rattles next, filling hollow wooden balls with dried beans and attaching smooth handles. The soft shake of the toys soon became Thomas's favorite sound. But not everything came easily. Elena's milk struggled to flow, her body weakened by the difficult journey and birth. Jonathan recognized the worried crease in her brow as Thomas fussed at her breast, hungry but unable to get enough. "He needs more," Elena admitted one morning, tears in her eyes. "My body, too much fear, too little food." Jonathan knew what he had to do. Loading his rifle and pulling on his heaviest coat, he set out through knee-deep snow toward Emma Caldwell's ranch 12 miles away. The widow was known for her prized goats and kind heart, though she kept mostly to herself since losing her husband in a mining accident. The journey was treacherous. Twice he had to dig his horse out of deep drifts, and once they nearly slid off a hidden ledge. By the time he reached Emma's ranch, his beard was frozen solid and his fingers could barely grip the reins. Emma opened her door cautiously, shotgun ready. "Jonathan McCready? What brings you out in this weather?" "Need goat's milk, Emma. It's important." Her sharp eyes took in his desperate expression. Mighty odd for a lone trapper to need milk. She paused, studying him. Must be quite a story behind it. Jonathan met her gaze steadily, letting her see the father's love that had grown in his heart. "Please, Emma. There's a hungry baby depending on it." Something softened in her face. She lowered the shotgun and nodded. "Wait here." She returned with 2 full milk jugs and a bag of supplies, clean cloths, a rubber nipple, even a tiny knitted blanket. "Don't need to know the details," she said quietly. "Just take good care of them." Back at the cabin, Jonathan learned the intricate dance of caring for a newborn. His large hands became surprisingly gentle as he changed Thomas's moss diapers and wrapped him in the soft rabbit fur blankets he'd sewn. Elena showed him how to test the milk's temperature on his wrist and hold Thomas at just the right angle for feeding. During quiet evenings, while the blizzard howled outside and Captain Morrison's patrol remained trapped at their distant camp, Elena shared more of her people's traditions. She taught Jonathan Ute words for family, Pesoapu for father, Piaputsi for baby, and showed him the proper way to wrap Thomas in his cradle board. "My grandmother says baby learns strength from being bound close," she explained, demonstrating the careful wrapping technique. "Learns to stand tall like mountain pine." Jonathan absorbed everything, from the sacred songs that made Thomas smile to the small gestures of respect Elena's people showed their children. When Thomas cried at night, Jonathan would pace the cabin floor, humming the Ute lullabies until his son drifted back to sleep. These moments, in the firelight's glow with Thomas sleeping peacefully between them, became precious beyond measure. One evening, Elena reached across their sleeping child and placed her hand over Jonathan's heart. "Good man," she said simply. "Good father. Thomas blessed." Jonathan covered her hand with his own, feeling more complete than he had since losing Sarah. These 2 weeks had given him something he never expected to find again: a family. But their peaceful routine was interrupted one stormy afternoon by the sound of approaching hooves. A telegraph messenger, half frozen and exhausted, had fought through the weather to reach Captain Morrison's camp. Through the frost-covered window, Jonathan watched the man hand over an official message, his heart tightening with worry for his newfound family's future. The late February sunshine brought an unexpected warmth to the mountain valley. Snow melted from the cabin's eaves in steady drips, creating miniature ice crystals that caught the light like diamonds. Inside, the small family had settled into rhythms as natural as breathing. Jonathan had dismantled his narrow bachelor's bed, using the wood to craft a larger one that could hold all three of them. His skilled hands shaped new posts and rails, while Elena wove fresh rope supports from strips of rawhide. Together they stuffed a wider mattress with clean straw and sweet-smelling pine needles. At night, they slept with Thomas nestled safely between them, his tiny breaths mixing with the crackle of the fire. During the days, Jonathan carved an endless parade of wooden toys, horses, bears, and birds that would one day dance in Thomas's small hands. His favorite creation was a delicate mobile of mountain animals that spun above the cradle. Thomas's dark eyes followed the figures, his tiny fingers reaching up to grasp at the moving shadows. "Look how strong he grows," Jonathan said one morning, letting Thomas grip his weathered finger. The baby's hold was surprisingly firm. "Got a good strong grip there, son." Elena smiled from where she sat, grinding herbs. "He knows his father's touch." As Elena's strength fully returned, she began sharing deeper teachings about her people's connection to the sacred mountains. In the firelit evenings, while Thomas nursed or slept, she would tell stories passed down through generations of Ute mothers. "The mountain spirits watch over their children," she explained, her voice soft with reverence. "They teach us to be strong like stone, flexible like pine, flowing like spring water. All these gifts I see in Thomas." One particularly peaceful evening, they sat together on the bearskin rug before the hearth. Thomas lay sleeping on his cradle board, his dark lashes casting tiny shadows on his cheeks. The fire cast dancing light across the cabin's walls, and through the window they could see the first stars appearing in the twilight sky. Elena reached over and placed her hand against Jonathan's chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. "Love makes family," she said softly. "Not blood. You spoke truth that night when you called him me son." Jonathan covered her hand with his own, overcome by the perfection of the moment. Here was everything he'd thought lost forever. A family, a purpose, a reason for his heart to beat with joy again. He looked down at Thomas, marveling at how completely this child had claimed his love. The peace shattered with the sound of approaching horses. Captain Morrison's patrol emerged from the tree line, but this time something was different. The captain's face was grim as he dismounted, and behind him rode a man in a formal black coat, Indian Agent Silas Brennan, known throughout the territory for his harsh policies. "McCready," Morrison called out, "bring out the Ute woman. We have new orders." Jonathan stepped onto the porch, his heart pounding. "What new orders?" Agent Brennan pulled a document from his coat. "Elena, daughter of Chief Running Bear, is hereby charged with the murder of 2 United States soldiers during the unlawful resistance at White River." "That's impossible," Jonathan protested. "She was already gone when—" "We have witnesses," Brennan cut him off smoothly. "She'll be transported to Denver for trial. The half-breed child will be placed in a government Indian school in Kansas, where it can be properly civilized." Elena appeared in the doorway behind Jonathan, clutching Thomas to her chest. "No, you cannot take my son!" Her voice broke with terror. "He is too small. He will die without his mother's milk." Morrison at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, but Brennan's face remained cold. "The law is clear. Children of hostile tribes must be educated properly." As the soldiers began to surround the cabin, Elena turned to Jonathan with desperate eyes. "Claim him," she begged. "Tell them he is yours. They will believe you. Please, save our son." Jonathan looked from Elena's terrified face to Thomas's innocent one, then to the soldiers closing in with iron determination. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a physical force. Everything they'd built, every moment of peace and family they'd created, balanced on what he would say next. Thomas stirred against Elena's chest, one tiny hand reaching out toward Jonathan. In that instant, he knew there was no choice at all. This was his son, in every way that mattered, and he would not let him be taken. Jonathan's world collapsed in mere moments. The soldiers moved with brutal efficiency, their boots thundering across his cabin's wooden floor. Two men seized Elena's arms while she clutched Thomas desperately to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "This is madness!" Jonathan lunged forward, but Morrison's men forced him back with rifle barrels. "She's just given birth. You can't take her." Dr. Samuel Hartwell, a distinguished-looking man with graying temples, stepped between the soldiers and Elena. "Captain Morrison, I must protest. As a medical professional, I can attest this woman is in no condition for travel. The postpartum risks alone." "Step aside, doctor," Morrison ordered, though his voice held a note of regret. "These orders come directly from territorial command. My hands are tied." Elena's soft sobs mixed with Thomas's frightened wails as the soldiers began dragging her toward the door. Jonathan struggled against the men restraining him, his voice raw with desperation. "Morrison, please! There must be some other way!" The captain wouldn't meet his eyes. "Federal murder charges aren't negotiable, McCready. You know that." Elena twisted in the soldier's grip, managing to press something cold and metallic into Jonathan's hands. Her grandmother's silver bracelet caught the firelight, its ancient tribal patterns seeming to dance. "Keep this for our son," she whispered fiercely. "Tell him his mother's people were proud and free." "Elena!" Jonathan's cry was primal as he fought to reach her. A rifle butt slammed into his stomach, doubling him over. Through watering eyes, he watched helplessly as they tore Thomas from Elena's arms. "No, my baby." Elena's scream pierced the mountain air. "Please, not my baby." Dr. Hartwell quickly took Thomas, handling the infant with gentle expertise. "I'll make sure he's returned to his father," he assured Elena, shooting a meaningful look at Jonathan. The doctor's words carried clear intent. He was publicly establishing Jonathan's paternity. The soldiers dragged Elena outside into the bitter cold. Iron shackles clinked as they bound her wrists, the metal harsh against her skin. Jonathan staggered to the doorway, one arm still wrapped around his bruised ribs, watching as they loaded her into a heavy prison wagon. "She'll freeze to death on the week-long journey to Denver," he shouted at Morrison's back. The captain paused, then turned and tossed his own military blanket into the wagon. It wasn't much, but it was something. Without another word, he mounted his horse and gave the order to move out. Dr. Hartwell carefully transferred the screaming Thomas back to Jonathan's arms. "I'm truly sorry," the physician said quietly. "I'll do what I can to help prove her innocence." Jonathan barely heard him. His entire world had narrowed to Elena's face in the wagon, growing smaller as the patrol moved down the snowy track. Her last desperate cry echoed across the valley. "I love you both." Then they were gone, leaving nothing but churned snow and the lingering sound of wagon wheels. The next hours passed in a blur of grief and rage. Thomas would not be consoled, his tiny body racked with sobs that seemed too big for his 3-week-old frame. Jonathan paced the cabin endlessly, bouncing and shushing the baby, his own tears falling silently into Thomas's dark hair. "I know, son," he murmured hoarsely. "I miss her too. So much it feels like dying." The night stretched eternal. Every creak of the cabin's timbers made Jonathan's head snap up, hoping impossibly that Elena would somehow return. Thomas finally fell into exhausted sleep near dawn, but Jonathan couldn't rest. He stood at the window, watching the eastern sky slowly brighten, the silver bracelet clutched so tightly in his hand that the patterns left imprints in his palm. When the sun's first rays touched the cabin, Jonathan turned to Elena's side of their bed. The quilts still held the shape of her body, and one of her long black hairs lay across the pillow. The sight broke something open inside him. Holding Thomas close against his chest, Jonathan sank to his knees beside the bed. "I swear by all that's holy," he whispered fiercely. "I'll prove your innocence, Elena. Whatever it takes, however long it takes, I'll bring you home to us. This I vow." Thomas stirred in his sleep, one tiny hand clutching Jonathan's shirt. Together, father and son faced their first morning alone, while miles away across the snowy mountains, a prison wagon carried their heart toward Denver. Jonathan sat in his rocking chair, gently swaying with Thomas nestled against his chest. The infant's soft breathing was the only sound breaking the heavy silence that had settled over the cabin since Elena's arrest. Dark circles shadowed Jonathan's eyes from 2 sleepless nights of worry. A sharp knock at the door startled them both. Thomas whimpered as Jonathan rose cautiously, one protective arm curled around his son. He opened the door to find Mrs. Emma Caldwell on his threshold, her normally pristine widow's black dusted with snow from the ride. "Mr. McCready," she said without preamble, "I have news about Elena." She swept inside, unwrapping a thick leather-bound book from her shawl. "I've been researching territorial law since you came for goat's milk. There's hope." Jonathan's heart leaped. "What kind of hope?" Mrs. Caldwell spread the book on his table, pages rustling as she found her place. "Elena's marriage to Standing Wolf was legally recorded at Morrison Trading Post. I found the registry entry myself." Her finger traced along neat rows of text. "This makes Thomas a legitimate heir to valuable tribal lands." "How does that help prove her innocence?" Jonathan asked, adjusting Thomas as the baby stirred. "It establishes her character and standing. But there's more." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Those 2 soldiers she supposedly killed, I cross-referenced Army casualty reports. They died in a documented battle with Cheyenne warriors near Bear Creek, 50 miles away and 3 days before Elena's village was even attacked." Jonathan sank into his chair, hope blooming in his chest for the first time since Elena's arrest. "You're certain?" "I'll testify to it myself," Mrs. Caldwell declared firmly, "and to Elena's gentle nature with Thomas. No mother who shows such tender care could be a murderer." Before Jonathan could respond, another knock echoed through the cabin. This time it was Dr. Samuel Hartwell, his medical bag in hand and concern etched on his distinguished features. "I had to come back," the doctor said, stepping inside. "My conscience won't let me rest after witnessing that arrest." He nodded a greeting to Mrs. Caldwell before turning to Jonathan. "How is the boy?" "Missing his mother something fierce?" Jonathan replied hoarsely. Dr. Hartwell checked Thomas briefly, his experienced hands gentle. "He's strong, like his mother, like the day he was born." The physician's voice grew distant. "I lost so many patients in last summer's epidemic, started questioning everything. My skills, my faith, even God's mercy." He touched Thomas's cheek softly. "But this child, delivering him healthy despite impossible odds, watching him thrive, it's begun restoring my hope. Perhaps that's why I can't stay silent now." "What do you mean?" Jonathan asked. "I'm willing to wire the territorial governor," Hartwell said. "As a medical expert, I can prove Elena couldn't have been at that battle site when those soldiers died. She was nearly full term then. No woman in her condition could have traveled 50 miles on horseback." Mrs. Caldwell nodded approvingly. "Between my legal research and your medical testimony, we can expose these charges as fabrications." "Agent Brennan won't give up easily," Jonathan warned. "He wants those tribal lands badly enough to destroy innocent lives." "Then we'll fight him with truth," Mrs. Caldwell declared. She pulled paper and pen from her bag. "Doctor, help me draft this telegram. We'll need to word it carefully to catch the governor's attention." Jonathan watched in amazement as his unlikely allies bent over the table, combining their knowledge to build Elena's defense. Mrs. Caldwell's legal expertise flowed through the doctor's precise medical terminology, creating arguments that could cut through bureaucratic indifference. Thomas cooed softly, drawing Jonathan's attention. The baby's dark eyes, so like Elena's, seemed clearer today, less clouded by grief. Jonathan touched the silver bracelet he now wore on his wrist, its ancient patterns a constant reminder of his vow. "Your mama's coming home, little one," he whispered. "We've got help now. Good people standing with us." Mrs. Caldwell looked up from her writing. "We'll need to move quickly. The territorial court convenes in 2 weeks." Dr. Hartwell nodded. "I'll ride to the telegraph office today. The governor should have our evidence before Elena reaches Denver." For the first time since Elena's arrest, Jonathan felt the weight on his chest lighten slightly. They had proof of her innocence. They had respected witnesses willing to testify. Most importantly, they had hope. He watched Mrs. Caldwell and Dr. Hartwell working together, their shared purpose bridging differences of background and belief. Thomas gurgled again, a sound almost like laughter, as if the infant sensed the changing tide of his family's fortune. The morning sun cast long shadows across Jonathan's cabin floor as he changed Thomas's moss wrapping. A knock at the door made him pause, his heart racing with memories of Elena's arrest. 3 mounted figures had appeared in his yard, 2 young warriors flanking an elderly man whose silver hair and dignified bearing marked him as a tribal elder. Jonathan lifted Thomas protectively to his shoulder, but something in the old man's gentle expression eased his fear. The elder dismounted with surprising grace, speaking clear English. "I am Joseph Crow Feather, Elena's grandfather. We come in peace, seeking justice, not violence." Relief flooded Jonathan's face. "Please, come inside." He stepped back, cradling Thomas as the elder entered. The 2 warriors remained respectfully outside. Elder Joseph's weathered hands reached for Thomas, his eyes bright with emotion. "May I hold my great-grandson?" Jonathan carefully transferred the baby. The elder examined Thomas's features with joy, speaking soft Ute words of blessing. "He has Elena's eyes, and her spirit. I see it already." Mrs. Caldwell arrived during this exchange, her buggy rattling up to the cabin. She entered carrying her law books, stopping short at the sight of the tribal elder cradling Thomas. "Mrs. Caldwell," Jonathan said, "this is Elder Joseph Crow Feather, Elena's grandfather." The elder nodded respectfully. "I was educated at St. Michael's Mission School before becoming chief. Perhaps we can combine our knowledge to help my granddaughter." They gathered around Jonathan's table as Elder Joseph shared memories of Elena's childhood. Even as a small girl, she showed the healer's gift. She could find the right herbs, speak the proper prayers. Our people sought her wisdom even before her training was complete. His voice grew tender. When Standing Wolf courted her, he brought not just the traditional gifts, but rare healing plants he had gathered in the high country. He understood her heart. Jonathan thought of Elena teaching him about pine needle tea and childbirth roots. Mrs. Caldwell took careful notes as the elder spoke. "These murder charges are impossible to anyone who knows Elena," Elder Joseph continued. "She believes in preserving life, not taking it, but Agent Brennan cares nothing for truth." His face hardened. "For months, Brennan has pressured our leaders to sign away mineral rights on tribal lands. When we refuse, he threatens criminal charges, relocation, taking our children. Elena's arrest is his latest attempt to break our resistance." Mrs. Caldwell's pen scratched rapidly. "This establishes a pattern of corruption. The territorial governor needs to hear this testimony." Elder Joseph nodded, then grew solemn. "But first, we must perform an important ceremony." He retrieved a small bundle from his saddlebag, unwrapping items for a traditional ritual. "You have acted as Thomas's father in truth," he told Jonathan. "Now you must become his father in our way as well." Mrs. Caldwell set aside her notes to witness the ceremony. Elder Joseph burned sacred herbs, their sweet smoke filling the cabin as he chanted ancient prayers. He placed Thomas in Jonathan's arms, marking both their foreheads with red ochre. "By the laws of our people, you are now father to this child," the elder declared. Your love for him is recognized by the ancestors and the mountain spirits." Mrs. Caldwell dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. "I'll ensure this adoption is recorded under territorial law as well. No one can dispute Jonathan's right to protect Thomas now." Elder Joseph spent the next hour teaching Jonathan proper Ute prayers for Thomas's protection and blessing. The former hermit repeated each phrase carefully, determined to honor both his son's heritage and Elena's trust. As afternoon shadows lengthened, their unlikely group, widow, trapper, tribal elder, and warriors, began planning Elena's defense. Mrs. Caldwell organized their evidence against Agent Brennan. The warriors offered to gather supporting testimonies from Elena's village. Elder Joseph would speak to other chiefs who had faced Brennan's corruption. "We will need all our strength combined," Elder Joseph said, touching Thomas's cheek tenderly. "But truth and justice are strong medicines. They can overcome even the darkest poison of greed." Jonathan watched his new allies, his son's family by both blood and choice, working together to save Elena. Thomas slept peacefully in his arms, secure in his father's embrace, while outside the cabin window, storm clouds gathered over the distant mountains. The autumn wind whipped across the mountain trail as Jonathan adjusted Thomas's papoose, checking that the intricate leather carrier crafted by Elder Joseph kept his son warm against the morning chill. Their small wagon convoy had been traveling for 5 days, winding through narrow passes toward Denver's territorial courthouse. Dr. Hartwell rode alongside, keeping careful watch over 3-month-old Thomas. The infant's tiny coughs worried Jonathan, but the doctor's herbal remedies and constant monitoring helped maintain the baby's strength. "His breathing sounds clearer today," Dr. Hartwell assured, passing Jonathan a fresh bottle of goat's milk Mrs. Caldwell had packed. Their unusual party drew curious stares at each stop. The gruff mountain trapper carrying a mixed-blood baby, the respected widow with her law books, the distinguished tribal elder, and the troubled physician. But their shared purpose drove them forward, despite discomfort and fatigue. Mrs. Caldwell kept her precious documents protected in an oilskin wrap, trading post records proving Elena's legitimate marriage, witness statements from honest merchants, and carefully researched legal precedents. Elder Joseph carried his own vital cargo, written testimonies from tribal leaders and healing women about Elena's gentle character and sacred work among their people. On the 7th morning, Denver's brick buildings finally appeared through the mountain haze. Jonathan's heart pounded as they approached the territorial jail, a grim stone structure that had held Elena for weeks. The guard led them down a dark corridor that smelled of mildew and despair. "Elena!" Jonathan's voice cracked as he reached the iron bars of her cell. She emerged from the shadows, and his breath caught painfully. Her face had grown gaunt, her proud shoulders hunched. But when she saw Thomas sleeping peacefully in the papoose, her eyes filled with tears of joy. "My son," she whispered, reaching through the bars to touch Thomas's soft cheek. "I feared I would never see him again." Her fingers trembled as she stroked the baby's dark hair. Jonathan pressed as close to the bars as possible, letting Elena lean against him while she held Thomas's tiny hand. "We're here to take you home," he promised hoarsely. "We have proof of your innocence." Dr. Hartwell approached, his medical bag in hand. "Let me examine you, Elena. You've lost too much weight." His gentle examination confirmed their fears. Poor nutrition and harsh conditions had taken their toll on her health. Mrs. Caldwell spoke up firmly. "I'm filing an immediate petition for better conditions. This treatment is unconscionable." She began writing furiously in her legal notebook. Elder Joseph stepped forward, speaking soft words of comfort in their shared Ute language. Elena's tears flowed freely as her grandfather blessed her through the cell bars. "Be strong, little dear," he murmured. "Justice comes with the morning sun." Their reunion was cut short by heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Agent Brennan appeared, his face twisted with barely concealed rage at seeing their gathered allies. "Visiting hours are over," he snapped. "The trial starts tomorrow morning. Judge Harrison doesn't waste time with these cases." Jonathan's hands clenched into fists, but Mrs. Caldwell touched his arm in warning. They couldn't risk any confrontation now. Dr. Hartwell stepped forward instead, his voice cold with professional authority. "I have military records here proving the soldiers Elena allegedly killed were actually lost in a documented Cheyenne battle 50 miles away, 3 days before her village was even attacked." Brennan's face reddened. "Those records are sealed." "Not to a commissioned army physician," Dr. Hartwell replied calmly. "The territorial governor's office has copies now." Mrs. Caldwell added, "As do 3 respected traders who've sworn statements about Elena's peaceful character, men whose testimony carries significant weight with the territorial court." Elder Joseph's quiet dignity seemed to fill the narrow corridor. "Our tribal council has also provided formal evidence of Elena's role as a healer. Her hands serve life, not death." Brennan's composure cracked. He grabbed a passing guard, demanding, "Clear these people out, and make sure that Indian woman appears in court first thing tomorrow." He stormed away, but they could hear him shouting about rushing the trial schedule. Elena pressed her face against the bars, suddenly desperate. "The baby. Promise you'll protect him if—" "No," Jonathan cut her off firmly. "We're taking you home. Both of you." He touched her cold fingers through the iron bars. "I swore to keep our family together. Trust in that." As guards forced them to leave, Elena's voice followed them down the corridor, singing a soft Ute lullaby to Thomas. Jonathan carried their son back into the harsh sunlight, where their legal team gathered to prepare for the next day's crucial trial. Judge Harrison's courthouse loomed ahead, a massive brick building where Elena's fate would soon be decided. One chance to prove her innocence, one opportunity to expose Brennan's corruption, one shot at bringing their family back together. The territorial courthouse buzzed with tension as Jonathan stood before Judge Harrison, holding a fussy Thomas in his arms. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating the packed gallery where townsfolk, traders, and tribal members sat shoulder to shoulder. Agent Brennan lounged confidently at the prosecution table, while Captain Morrison sat stiffly beside him, his face troubled. Elena, thin but proud in a clean dress provided by Mrs. Caldwell, faced the judge with quiet dignity. Jonathan stepped forward when called, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed courtroom. "Your Honor, I stand before you to declare what's in my heart." He looked down at Thomas, who had grabbed his finger with a tiny fist. "This child is my son by choice and love, if not by blood. His mother is an innocent woman wrongly accused, and I stake my honor on her character." Dr. Hartwell approached the bench next, spreading military documents across the judge's desk. "These records prove conclusively that the 2 soldiers Elena allegedly killed died in a documented battle with Cheyenne warriors 50 miles north of her village. More critically," he pointed to dates and locations, "this occurred 3 days before Elena's village was even attacked. She was in labor with Thomas at the time, as my medical records show." Mrs. Caldwell presented trading post records and sworn statements from respected merchants. "Elena's marriage to Standing Wolf was legally recorded here," she indicated the yellowed pages. "Multiple witnesses testify to her peaceful nature and healing work among both settlers and tribal people." Elder Joseph Crow Feather rose slowly, his dignified presence commanding attention. Speaking perfect English, he described Elena's life of service as a healer. "My granddaughter's hands have only ever brought life, never death," he stated firmly. "Her husband, Standing Wolf, died protecting our families from forced relocation. He was a warrior of honor, not a murderer of soldiers." The courtroom fell silent as Dr. Hartwell revealed his most damaging evidence. "Agent Brennan offered me $100 to falsify testimony about Elena's whereabouts during the alleged murders. He produced a signed affidavit. He attempted to bribe me to corrupt medical evidence." Judge Harrison's face darkened as he examined the proof of corruption. Brennan leapt up, shouting accusations. but the judge silenced him with a thunderous gavel strike. "The evidence before this court is overwhelming," Judge Harrison declared. "All charges against Elena are dismissed." He turned to the bailiff. "Take Agent Brennan into custody for fraud and conspiracy against the territorial government." As Brennan was led away in handcuffs, Elena rushed to Jonathan and Thomas, tears streaming down her face. Their family embraced while the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Judge Harrison raised his hand for quiet. "Furthermore, this court formally recognizes Jonathan McCrady's legal guardianship of Thomas while fully protecting Elena's maternal rights." He smiled at the reunited family. "Let the record show that love, not merely blood, makes a family in the eyes of the law." Golden sunlight warmed the expanded mountain cabin as spring flowers dotted the meadow with splashes of purple and yellow. The cabin had grown considerably since that frozen February night. Jonathan's skilled hands had added 2 new rooms, a covered porch, and sturdy furniture crafted from pine and oak. In the freshly tilled garden, Elena knelt in rich soil, showing 8-month-old Thomas a sprouting tomato plant. "Tukupu," she said in Ute, then smiled. "Tomato in English, little one." Thomas reached out with chubby fingers, babbling a mix of both languages as mountain birds sang overhead. Jonathan paused from stacking his latest bundle of fox and beaver pelts, watching his family with quiet joy. His trading business had flourished these past months, driven by new purpose. Each pelt meant more comfort for Elena and Thomas. Better food, warmer clothes, new books for teaching their son both cultures. Dr. Samuel Hartwell's horse nickered from the newly built stable during his monthly visit. The physician's face had softened since witnessing their family's triumph over injustice, his own faith renewed through their miracle of love. "That boy's growing strong as a mountain oak," he declared, checking Thomas's heartbeat. Mrs. Emma Caldwell arrived later that afternoon, her wagon loaded with fresh supplies and 3 new quilts she'd stitched herself. "Every child needs a proper grandmother," she announced, scooping up Thomas while he giggled at her silver hair. The spring day grew even more meaningful when Captain Morrison appeared, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. He'd been reassigned after Agent Brennan's corruption scandal broke. "I came to apologize properly," he said, standing straight-backed before Elena. "What we did was wrong. Your courage taught me that following orders isn't always the same as doing right." The cabin truly came alive for Thomas's first birthday celebration. Elder Joseph Crow Feather arrived with several tribal members, bringing beautifully beaded moccasins and a tiny ceremonial drum. The feast brought together their entire chosen family, settlers and tribal members sharing food and stories as the mountain sun set in brilliant orange. Later that evening, as their guests chatted around the fire pit Jonathan had built, Elena drew him aside near Thomas's wooden cradle. She took his weathered hand, pressing it first against her heart, then laying it gently on their sleeping son's back. "You touched my belly that first frozen night," she whispered, happy tears shining in her eyes. "You said my son before you knew anything about us. Your heart spoke truth before your mind understood it." She squeezed his hand. "Love makes family, not blood." Jonathan gazed at his wife and son, remembering how close he'd come to turning them away that desperate night. His greatest challenge had become his greatest blessing. Taking out his carving knife, he stepped to the cabin's doorframe, the same threshold where he'd found them nearly frozen to death. With careful strokes, he carved their son's full name, Thomas Standing Wolf McCready. Elena wrapped her arms around his waist as he worked, both of them remembering that life-changing night. The door that had once barely kept out death and cold now served as the entrance to their warm, eternal home. Thanks for tuning in. These stories remind us that life is more than headlines. It's about heartlines. Subscribe if you want more moments that make you pause, feel, and reflect.